Hello. In this video, I want to do something a little different than we've done in the past. So in my previous videos, I've just talked about a topic, and one of the things that I've talked to you all a lot about is being self-sufficient, self-reliant, learning skills, getting away from some of the conveniences that we've become really accustomed to. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to learn to use all of our resources to their full extent. We've kind of gotten to a place, as I've said in the past, conveniences have become necessities. We count on a lot of other people for a lot of things. And so one way we can kind of reclaim some of that responsibility is learning new skills. So the one I want to talk about today is rendering animal fat for you to use going forward. This is a product that we would typically throw away, or we may even buy off the shelf for quite a high price from what I've found. And so I'm going to show you how to take beef fat, you might have heard it referred to as suet or tallow, and we're going to render that into the actual tallow, which is a clarified fat. So what we're going to start with is about 3 pounds of mostly beef fat. There's a little bit of meat left on this. Now I went to a local butcher and I bought 3 pounds of this for $2.25. They typically throw this in the trash, and I think he just came up with 75 cents a pound. So there's a lot of it out there to be had if you want it. So we're going to start with the fat, a couple of other things I have around. Large knife if you're going to have to cut big pieces, which we have a couple in here that we will, and then a small knife if we need to get some small chunks of meat off of the fat. I've got a cast iron bowl here, like a Dutch oven that I'm actually going to end up heating the fat in to melt it, and then a cutting board, and then obviously our bowl. Now this fat is actually been in the freezer for probably a half hour. It was refrigerated before that. Now getting it cold is going to make it easier to work with because the fat's going to get more solid. It'll make it easier to cut through. So right off the bat, what we're going to do is take some of these pieces. So we have smaller pieces that are mostly fat. So we see how these are all white. They're pretty hard, but if I try to pull it apart, you see how it's kind of, it looks sticky, but there's actually connective tissue in there. So there's a lot of layers of connective tissue. We're not going to worry about separating all of that out. It would take forever. When we render this down and heat it up, all that fat's going to melt from inside of that connective tissue, and we'll be able to separate it later. We've got some strainers and some cheesecloth around that we're going to do that with. So I'm going to take these pieces out. So here's a good example of a piece that has a lot of meat on it. You can see some of this you can just pull off like that. Pretty simple. Separate that stuff out as well as you can. And then all of that, there's some meat in there, but I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. Now all of this work will be made a lot easier with a sharp knife. So you want to make sure this is all this stuff sharpened and of course clean beforehand. So while I pull some of this out, I'm going to give you some idea of why you might want to do this. For one, like I said, this costs $2.25 to get all of this. You know, I was at the meat market already getting the chicken and the beef for the week, because unfortunately right now we're not in a position to raise our own, but since we can't, I want to get it from someone local if you can. And on top of that, when you are selecting your meat, really of any kind, but also this beef fat, if we can get it, we want grass-fed. Now grass-fed beef, the meat itself, but also the fat, is always going to have more nutritional content. So some of the things that we're going to look for or expect to get out of this beef fat, especially this suet kind of stuff, this really hard fat, because this is coming from around the kidneys of the cow and really the back end. So that's going to be tougher than you might get the fat that you typically see on a steak. This is a little more crumbly, maybe more brittle, and that's where we're really getting a lot of vitamin concentration. So this fat in itself, you know, a lot of us have thought for a long time that, or we've heard maybe we want to get away from animal fat. That is not a theory I ascribe to, and modern medicine, or really modern science, is showing us that that's not necessarily true. For a long time, we started using things like crisco, which are hydrogenated oils that are really, really just not good for you. Hydrogenated vegetable oils, your body just doesn't really process it well. So we can get back to something like this, a product that we might have already. If you have been buying meat, you could have this fat already that you would have thrown in the garbage, or again, like I said, it's really inexpensive at your butcher. But it's about half mono unsaturated fat and about half saturated fat. So with that, we get a lot of vitamins, fat-soluble vitamins, obviously, because these are big chunks of fat. So you're going to get things like vitamin A, vitamin D, E, K, and B12. Now, another part of the vitamin B complex is actually a water-soluble vitamin, so we're not going to get many of those. But all your fat-soluble vitamins are going to be found in this fat. And on top of that, if you're cooking with this, any food that you have that has a lot of vitamins in it already is going to be more, especially fat-soluble vitamins, are going to be more easily digested if we're cooking with something like tallow, because fat-soluble vitamins have to be digested with fat to get into our blood. So again, right here, I have little pieces that have a little bit of meat on it. If you leave some of the meat on, that's okay. We just don't want big chunks. The more meat we can get out, the more pure of a finished product we're going to have. That will actually, some people don't mind. We're going to cook this at a low temperature to try to keep it as pure as possible. If you keep some more meat in there and it gets to cooking a little bit higher, you'll end up with a little bit darker product. It'll be a little more yellow, almost even brownish. That's okay, but what you're going to get with that is more of a beef flavor. Now, if you're cooking a lot of savory dishes, you probably don't care. You might be throwing this in a pan before you, pan fry steak. If that's what you're doing, you really don't care if there's a little extra meat flavor. But if you're going to use this in the place of somewhere you might have used shortening in the past, like making a pie crust or making biscuits, you probably don't want that meat flavor. So we want to try to get as much of that out as possible. Like I said, a little bit's okay, especially since we're going to cook it on low temperature. Now, a lot of these pieces, even though they do have that connective tissue, they're pretty clean, and you can see stuff like that. It's real white. Some little dark spots where you might have had some blood vessels running through there. Those are all right as well. If you try to dig all that out, you'll be here all day. So again, some more good benefits of this. Really just on the cooking standpoint, tallow is going to have a really high smoke point, which means we're going to be able to cook, pan fry something at a higher temperature without filling the whole house full of smoke. That you might get something, it'll smoke even a little higher than something like extra virgin olive oil. So typically with tallow, we're looking somewhere around 450 degrees smoke point. So that gives us a pretty good range to be able to cook and some high heat stuff, whereas some vegetable oils are actually going to oxidize when you cook them that high. And there's some thought that could cause, it increases the likelihood of free radicals in your food, which are thought to be carcinogenic. So even if you're trying to be healthy and you're cooking with something like olive oil and it burns, it could actually be carcinogenic, whereas tallow is less likely to do that. So we've got a lot of this cut down. I'm actually going to hang on to this big piece. It's a little softer than I wanted, and so I might actually render this on its own, because I'll probably end up with a little bit of a different product. I think this is probably not from the rear of the cow. Now, if you go to your meat market and ask for this, again, you're going to want to ask for kidney fat. Suet is really the real term for it, but a lot of these terms are used interchangeably now. If you tell them tallow, if you got a really good butcher, you might end up with the right stuff, but if you can say explicitly, I want that really white fat from around the kidneys, you're going to get the best stuff. Now, kind of back to our nutrition here. Like I said, a lot of people got kind of scared of animal fats and they wanted to get away from that. Some of that is kind of going the other way with the popularity of things like keto diets now, where people are trying to eat more fat, less carbohydrates. That's okay if you want to do that. But I will say that people that are afraid of the animal fats, one of the things that kind of scared people off was cholesterol. And a lot of people don't realize that your brain is using a lot of cholesterol just to function, for one, but cholesterol is also the basis for a lot of our hormones. So your endocrine system is really relying on it. So if we start not having enough fat in our diet, men will see things like a decrease in your testosterone, and that can just be from generally not having enough fat in your diet. I typically try to say somewhere around 30% of my total calories being fat, but having those animal fats have been shown, particularly grass-fed beef fats, because they do have the things like the choline and the conjugated linoleic acid in it, CLA, that you've heard of before. There is some evidence to show that that actually increases your testosterone levels in and of itself, even when we're staying within that 30% range. And finally, another little benefit of using a product like this is it helps hydrate your skin. Having those healthy fatty acids circulating in your system will give good skin tone, good skin elasticity. So that's another really good benefit of that. So now we've got a lot of this separated out. I've got my meat here. This is really just almost all meat. There's some little pieces maybe of fat that can go in here. I'll find something to do with that. I'm not going to throw that away. But now we've got our cast iron here pretty well full, and I'm going to go ahead and set the oven. Now, like I said, we want this to be the purest product possible, so I'm going to set this at a really low heat, probably the lowest heat that your oven will go to. I'm going to set it about 175 to 175 degrees Fahrenheit. Put the lid on this, so I'm going to go ahead and set that now. And again, our oven starts at 350, so I got to go all the way down to 175. Now, you probably want to start this somewhat early in the afternoon, earlier in the day, because this could take up to 5 or 6 hours to get this totally rendered down. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this in here now. Not going to wait for it to preheat. It'll be okay. We'll set our timer for an hour to begin with. Not really a lot of need to check it before then. Like I said, keep it low. We don't really want to go above 200 degrees. You can do this at a higher heat on stovetop, but again, we're going to get a little darker product. Know that if you do that, you're going to want to use that more for savory products, probably not as much for baking. So we'll take a break and we'll come back in about an hour and see how we're doing. Okay, it's actually been a little bit longer. We took about 3 hours. Should have told you when we started this, cut your pieces of fat smaller. It'll make the melting process a lot quicker. That's something, when I checked it at an hour, I realized I had neglected to do that. So I cut it down a little bit smaller and we let it go longer. Another little thing, as that fat that we were working with earlier started to thaw out, we realized that that big piece I had was actually pork. So it was good that we didn't put that in there, so we didn't mix the fat. And we actually got a really good chunk of pork off of there and cooked it while we waited, and it was great. And so that $2.25 we spent on the whole bundle of fat and meat, we probably essentially got the fat for free based on that little piece of meat. So now we've got, like I said, it's been about 3 hours. We've got our pot. It's not all the way melted, but we do have liquid in the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and drain some of this out. You might be able to see there's still a good bit of solid fat in here, but the bottom does have a lot of liquid in it. So I have a sieve on top of just a large measuring bowl, which is a good little thing to have because it has a spout on it. It'll make it a lot easier to pour this into a mason jar where we're going to store it. So we're going to pour this through the sieve, pretty close to clear liquid, a little bit yellow. And we're pouring it through the sieve because we don't want to get any meat pieces or any of that connective tissue that I showed you earlier into our fat. So we've still got a good ways to go in here, but we got some of that fat off of it. And so this is going to go back in the oven for probably a couple more hours. And once we're finished, we'll chat back in. All right, our fats had a little while longer to render. And during that break, I actually poured some off, strained it through our strainer, put cheesecloth over this, and then poured it into a mason jar. And so I'm gonna get a little bit more out of here now. Still pretty hot, so put these on. I'm just gonna dump the entire container into our sieve here. And let that drain through. And as you can see, there's still a lot of solid pieces in here. Some of that's still fat, but a lot of this is that connective tissue I mentioned earlier on in the video. So I'm just gonna move this around a little bit to make sure that we get most of that liquid fat off of it. See as that drips through. And as it drips through when it's still hot, it's kind of clear, a little yellowish. That's what we want. All right, so that's good. I'm gonna dump this back in there. I'll probably put this back in the oven for a little bit, see if I can render just a little bit more out of it. And now I'm gonna take my cheesecloth and put this over my mason jar because I want to get just a little extra filtration. As this goes longer, you'll start to see that the fat that you're draining off into your measuring cup is going to have little bits of stuff in it. A lot of that is the connective tissue, the little bits of meat that are still left in there breaking down. And so we want to strain all that out to get us the purest tallow in the end, because the more impurities we can get out of it, the longer it's going to keep. Now to that point, this will keep on your counter. Some people say up to a year if you put it in an airtight container like this, like a mason jar. If you put it in the refrigerator or the freezer, this could keep, I don't know, maybe indefinitely, a long time. The only thing I've heard people say about keeping it in the freezer for a long time, the only way it spoils is that it may eventually start tasting like your freezer. So you can kind of see a difference there of the warm. You might be able to see that looks a little more yellow on top, but as it cools off, it's gonna solidify and get to this white that we see down here, which is really a buttery consistency. It gets pretty hard at room temperature, but not too hard to spoon out or spread. Now, if you put it in the refrigerator, obviously it's gonna get a little bit harder. So you may wanna have a small container that you keep on the counter and your larger container of tallow left in the refrigerator. So that's pretty much it. You have a process of how to make your own beef tallow. As long as we're getting it from good grass-fed cows, a healthy source of fat that has a lot of vitamins in it that are really good for us, helps us digest other fat-soluble vitamins like we talked about, has good flavor, and it's also giving you a way to use some of the stuff that you might be throwing away when you have your meat, or just getting a really cheap source of this type of product from your butcher. Like I said, it was 75 cents a pound, and we actually got some extra meat in it that really paid for the entire thing itself. So I appreciate you watching. Let me know if you do this and you come up with some good recipes that you really like tallow in. I'd be interested to hear them. I'm sure we'll do some maybe some more videos cooking with this in the future and some other ways to use it. So if you enjoyed this, please like, comment, subscribe if you want to see what else we're doing. I'm going to be posting more videos about ways we can be more resourceful and some skills that we can learn to be a little more self-reliant and not have to count on as many conveniences, like I said before, that we've turned into necessities. So thanks for being here, and I hope to talk to you again soon.